Imagine this scenario. You're out of the office unexpectedly, and a colleague pings you because they need access to some system you have credentials for. Now, my listeners would never send passwords over email or Slack. But what about your coworkers? How many organizations out there are sending logins back and forth in plain text? Worse yet, how many just store all of their logins on a shared spreadsheet? Keeper Security's password management platform locks down logins, payment cards, and more in a patented zero-knowledge encrypted vault. Sign up for a Keeper free trial today. Visit securityweekly.com/Keeper. Workloads protected by VMware are the safest workloads in the multi-cloud. Private cloud, public cloud, any cloud. Stronger, with distributed protection to the API and everything east-west, inside, and cross-cloud. Stronger, with 3 layers of detection, trusting nothing and seeing everything, even the best hidden bad actors. Stronger, with an SE Labs AAA certified advanced NDR that brings the multi-cloud together for the win. You've got workloads, we've got security. VMware Security. Simply stronger. Visit securityweekly.com/VMware to learn more.
Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. CRA's Business Intelligence Unit has launched its next survey on Zero Trust. What are your barriers to Zero Trust implementation? Take our survey and enter to win a $500 Tango card by visiting securityweekly.com/Zero Trust. Report results will be released at our upcoming Zero Trust eSummit in March. And I remember from last week, maybe it was the week before, we talked about the Tango card. It's basically like a gift card that turns into other gift cards, whatever gift cards you want. So it's pretty cool. Use it for just about anything. All right, for our next interview, we are talking to Darwin Salazar. He joins us today to talk about Microsoft's Cloud SIEM, Sentinel. Darwin is currently a cloud security consultant at Accenture. Previously, he has worked on IoT security for medical devices and was a Security Weekly intern. Welcome to the show, Darwin.
Thanks, Adrian. Happy to be here. It's kind of like interesting seeing things come full circle. I was an intern in 2017 and 2018 in office, in studio at Security Weekly. Had some amazing times with the entire podcast crew, like Sam, Johnny, obviously Paul, Larry, and etc. Right? So just pretty excited to be on the show for my first time, and hopefully not the last. I know there's some stuff we're gonna tease in a little bit, but thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I've got to say, like, God, I'm sure I'm not the first person to mention it, but have you ever won an award? Has anybody ever teased you about having a Darwin Award?
I've been lucky not to win a Darwin Award. I think, from my understanding,
obviously not. You're here, right?
Yeah. But I think whenever folks hear the name Darwin, it's always like like under the context of evolution and everything else. And I think I should have took the route of a scientist sometimes, just to live up to the name and kind of explore what's the next evolution for humans. But I think we're kind of seeing that with the metaverse and all this Web3 stuff. But I think there is some tie-in with evolution in cybersecurity, which is maybe something I'll explore further in the future.
Nah, brother, you're in the right industry. Security's always evolving. You're right where you're supposed to be, I think.
True. Yeah, I would agree.
So yeah, speaking of this industry, maybe give us a little background on how you got into it. I actually don't know what you did as an intern at Security Weekly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's a very funny story. So I'll kind of just go through my origin story with how I got into the cybersecurity industry. I think it all started when I was playing. I used to play a lot of Xbox Live, Halo 3, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 with a bunch of friends. And then there was this hack that started coming around where if someone was in your game room, you could kind of kick them out of the chat, but also power down their Xbox. And that was my first exposure to like a real life hack. I had heard about it in the past. I was probably like 14, 15 years old as this was going on. And then I just had that thought lingering in the back of my mind, like there are ways where you can manipulate technologies to kind of mess around with people and get under their skin. And that kind of stuck with me. And as I got into college, I went to Salve Regina University in Newport, Rhode Island, not too far from the Security Weekly studio. And it's a liberal arts school. They don't have computer science or any engineering or anything of that nature at the undergrad level. And so what me and my peers decided to do is, why not create a cybersecurity club and bring that cybersecurity culture to campus through competing in things like the National Cyber League, but also posting posters about security awareness around campus, especially say right now we're in tax season, and we would post a flyer around like the quicker you file your taxes, the less likelihood that someone will file your taxes for you, something to that tune. And then as we created this cybersecurity club, we attended a lot of conferences. So that included DEF CON, Black Hat, also Cyversity, which is it's an organization focused on bringing minorities and women into the cybersecurity industry. So one thing that I really found out is, as I was immersing myself in the security industry, I kind of discovered that there's a community aspect to it, which is what you see at DEF CON and notice between DEF CON and Black Hat. It's kind of like Black Hat's the industry piece of it, and versus DEF CON's the community, where everybody's a little bit more laid back. And so at one conference, I believe it was at B-Sides Boston, 2016, I believe, 2017, where I met the Security Weekly crew. They had a booth there, and Paul had a talk. And I was like, I had no idea that they were located in Rhode Island, but I had obviously tuned into a lot of the shows. And I was wondering if they had like any job openings or anything where I could just like shadow, shoulder surf Paul, or just be a part of what the team was building. And there was I was lucky enough to find like an internship opportunity there. And basically what I did is help Sam and the operations team set up calls with and look for different podcast guests. And so I think I brought on, or helped bring on, about 75 plus guests. This also included brainstorming what topic the guests would be talking about, and it was very cool because it was great for networking and everything else, but just also getting a better feel for the security industry while I was still in college. Fast forward to getting my master's degree in Homeland Security at Salve. I also did some business programs at Harvard Business School. And as you mentioned, I do have the IoT security experience in medical devices and some mobile web app stuff at Ford Motors. And today I'm a cloud security consultant at Accenture, focusing on Azure security and Kubernetes security.
That's awesome. And I love that it started off with, I'd never even heard that you could remotely turn off somebody's Xbox. That's amazing.
Yeah, I was freaked out by it, but it also usually in Xbox game rooms, folks like to chirp at each other and talk crap a lot. It made me be a little more quiet and cognizant of like what I say to who I say it to. Because if you talk smack to the person who just kicked someone out of the game room and shut their Xbox off, you're probably next, right? So just being more aware and just knowing that some folks had that power was super interesting for me at that age.
Adrian, I also love that Darwin referred to it as his origin story, more like he's a superhero, because he is. So,
yeah,
Larry, I try to emulate my life after you, man. You're the real superhero here, and I hope to one day take one of your IoT courses at SANS. So, but I appreciate that comment, Larry.
You're welcome, and stop. You're going to give me a big head. I'm not going to be able to get out of my office. It's going to swell.
You already got a big head, man.
Yeah, and already some good advice there. Don't poke the cyber bear.
Exactly.
Yeah. So let's get into Sentinel. Let's jump in.
Absolutely. So, real quick, would we like to tease the workshop that we have coming up? And I'll add a little bit of context. I'll add a little bit of context around how this episode came about, and then also the workshop webinar that we have coming up on March 10th. When Security Weekly Unlocked went virtual due to COVID, in December. I had previously had a workshop slot slated to teach a workshop called KQL Kung Fu, which KQL is the Kusto query language, Microsoft proprietary query language. And so what we ended up doing is splitting up that workshop into two. And in this session for this Enterprise Security Weekly episode, we'll be covering the Microsoft Sentinel SIEM, but also like the value proposition and why some organizations should consider it. And then in the second part, it'll be a webcast where myself and Tyler Robinson will be taking you from zero to hero with KQL, so like basic syntax all the way to writing up your own queries for threat hunting and threat detection exercises. So that'll be super fun. I believe the registration link will be in the show notes, and I'm super excited to teach that course because I've kind of been waiting since November or December now at this point. So
you're prepared, you're ready.
Yeah, I'm ready to rumble.
yeah. We've got it both in the show notes, and I dropped it into the Discord. So, if you miss it, you're not looking. Exactly. All right. Talking about so getting into Sentinel, I haven't actually. It's been on my to-do list for a while to play around with Sentinel because I think there's a free tier where you can play with it for free and get into it. But my understanding is it's essentially Microsoft's, they're turning it into their main SIEM offering, and that it competes with other cloud-based SIEMs. Is that correct?
You have that exactly correct, right? So Microsoft Sentinel, formerly known as Azure Sentinel, is a cloud-native SIEM and SOAR solution. So it does separate itself from traditional SIEM in many different ways, and one of those is the SOAR solution, which I just mentioned, right? So SOAR is security orchestration and automated response. So it allows you to kind of add that. So with a traditional SIEM, there's like collect, detect, investigate. With the SOAR capability, you can now also remediate and have those automated steps within your security operations. There's a lot to cover with Sentinel. I would just start with some of the main features. It has a lot of the bells and whistles that traditional SIEMs do. So like being able to visualize your log, network security, or network flow logs, for example. You could also visualize spikes in activity throughout your environment and things of that nature. They also have out-of-the-box threat hunting queries, and they map them to MITRE as some SIEMs do. They also have, and I think this is one of the areas where it separates itself, they have data connectors which support over 120 different vendors and data sources, including obviously their own data sources with Azure and Microsoft, but also they support data ingestion with AWS, Palo Alto, and a bunch of other vendors, which is pretty cool. And for the most part, they try to make it easy setup. And so I've had like a very pleasant experience in my day-to-day work with the data connectors compared to some of the stuff done with more traditional SIEMs.
And it sounds like... Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like, one of the things Microsoft loves to do, when competing on this kind of thing is that they're Microsoft. So already a lot of the stuff that you need or you're already using is Microsoft related. So I think you mentioned when we were talking previously, that Microsoft just lets you store their own stuff, logs for Microsoft stuff for free.
Right. Yeah, and that's one of the biggest value propositions, right? Because for Microsoft-based shops that are leveraging Exchange, Microsoft Teams, SharePoint, and a bunch of, and they're in the Azure cloud, and they also have some on-prem workloads still, right? It's a very appealing value proposition that Sentinel and Microsoft allow you to ingest logs for free with no cap on it, right? So some example of those logs, I already mentioned Exchange, Teams, and SharePoint, but also Azure Activity Logs, Defender for Cloud and IoT logs, and there's a bunch of others that I can't really remember off the top of my head, but those are some of the logs that generate the most data, and especially as you scale up and you have like a larger enterprise, this could introduce some very huge cost savings compared to other competitors. So
yeah, and there's all the Defender stuff also. Like, have you figured out, like, do you understand all the security product naming within Microsoft's products? Because I get confused every time.
It's interesting, and it also tends to change. I would say like every year or two during Ignite.
I know it.
So yeah, so previously they had Azure Defender for X, right? And you can replace X for the different Azure services. So Azure Defender for storage, Azure Kubernetes service, Azure Defender for Key Vault, and you can just enumerate the different services within Azure, and they had some sort of Defender type of security monitoring capability for that service. Previously, I think in December or November, they have, and also Azure Sentinel, which is now Microsoft Sentinel, is another rename that they had. So Azure Defender is now Defender for Cloud, which is a bit interesting. And it kind of grouped all of it together into just the Defender for Cloud offering. So it does tend to get confusing, not to mention all of the on-prem Defender capabilities there. But I'm more so focused on the cloud side of things, but it does tend to get confusing.
And you've got Defender for IoT, and then Office 365 activity logs are different from Microsoft 365 Defender stuff, right?
You kind of have to whiteboard out all of the different logs and data sources within your environment just to make sure you're not mixing them up, because there are a lot of different data sources and the name changes make it even more confusing, right? So you have to go through a proper mapping exercise to get a better understanding of which logs you're collecting and if there's anything being left out, because I'm not sure why they changed the name so much or who's recommending and suggesting that they change this stuff, but I'm sure that you always see the uproar in Twitter whenever Microsoft has a name change for something that they already changed maybe a year ago. So yeah. I beg them to stop. Yeah.
So I mentioned I've been meaning to jump in here and play with Sentinel. What does it take? Like, how long would it take me to jump into Sentinel and start testing it out, playing around with it?
Absolutely. That's a good question. I think it would take maybe 15 to 20 minutes, to be honest, so long as you already have an Azure subscription. And right. Azure does provide a free trial with a lot of services free within that 12-month time frame from when you activate your free trial. Microsoft Sentinel has a 30-day free trial. And so what it takes for you to get set up with Microsoft Sentinel, you have to enable and create a log analytics workspace, which is the log and data aggregator beneath Sentinel. And then after you have that log analytics workspace created, you can then create Azure Sentinel or Microsoft Sentinel instance and lay it on top of the log analytics workspace. You cannot deploy Sentinel without a log analytics workspace, which is a very important thing to highlight. So it could probably take you anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes. And then you obviously want to start generating activity and data within your environment. So deploy some virtual machines, storage buckets, play around with Azure Active Directory, just create some noise within your environment, and also activate and connect the different data connectors for Azure Activity Logs, Azure Active Directory logs, and things of that nature, so that data and those logs are obviously being ingested into Sentinel. So I think in all, being generous, 25 to 30 minutes.
Yeah, definitely less of a heavy lift than a traditional SIEM. Sounds like.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's one of the points that I wanted to touch on, right? With Sentinel, there's no infrastructure costs. You don't have any hardware or also any ongoing maintenance in terms of like right sizing the server that's forwarding the logs from, say, on-prem to the third-party SIEM. Since it's all in-house, it's cloud native, it can easily scale and support all of your data needs. So if one day you have 500 gigs of logs ingested, but the next day, say it's Black Friday and there's a bunch of activity going on within the environment, and you have 1.5 terabyte of logs generated and activity generated, it can scale fairly easily without you having to go in there and conduct that maintenance, which relieves a lot of headache and kind of
overhead
planning for teams. So,
yeah. One of the things using traditional SIEMs, one of my biggest irritations is that the canned reports are never useful. The built-in alerts, I end up having to build all that stuff from scratch, pretty much. And you mentioned there are already some threat hunting queries built into it. What's that like when you jump in there, you've got your logs going into Microsoft Sentinel. How functional is it? How useful is it, before you start building your own custom stuff?
It's pretty useful. I think last time I looked, there were about 244 out-of-the-box threat hunting queries. And those queries are mapped to, so they also have SOAR automation playbook templates. I think maybe like 20. Some that also, like for ServiceNow, remediate any misconfigurations to your cloud assets and things of that nature if they're discovered. So they're like Microsoft and the Sentinel team has actually been making huge strides since releasing the product in late 2019 to kind of provide the customer the best experience possible as quick as possible as soon as they enable Sentinel. And so there's about 244 threat hunting queries mapped to MITRE. They also have, and their support, those threat hunting queries are not only for Azure or Microsoft products, they have queries for AWS, Palo Alto firewalls, and etc. They also have analytic rules, which are your threat detection rules that you have to go ahead and activate. And once they're activated, you could set them on a recurring. You could run the query on a recurrent basis, maybe 24 hours every 12 hours. And if there's any activity that triggers that alert, it would go ahead and obviously alert the team. So they also have analytic rules built in out of the box. So there's a ton to get you started there. And I would urge you, whenever you get the chance to go in there and just stick your head in there and play around just so you can see why Sentinel has been grabbing large market share. And then I also wanted to touch on a report, but I'll leave it there to see if there are any questions.
Yeah. Katie, Larry, do you guys have any questions before I throw out some more?
I'm good.
I'm just curious, Microsoft is in a market position to really almost do anything it wants with security. Why tackle a market that's sort of established, not terribly sexy? There are just so many companies in this space. There are so many entrenched players. I think I could guess, but tell me what the value proposition is to somebody who's been using an older deployed technology for 5, 10 plus years.
It's a very good question. I think putting like my Microsoft product manager hat on or executive hat on, I think part of it is the trying to increase the bottom line, trying to grab more revenue from their already large client base. And so they have a bunch of organizations already grandfathered in with since they're all using Exchange and the entire Microsoft suite, for example. And so that's part of it, just trying to capture more of increase the revenue, but also from a data collection or like building out their machine learning models for logs and data that's being collected from external vendors and even cloud providers. As I mentioned, they have support for AWS and GCP. Just being able to collect and look into some of those signals potentially is another attractive thing that they're looking at. But it's a very good question. I'm not sure if that's the type of answer that you were looking for, but those are two things that I would say that they're probably considering.
No, that's great. That's great.
Yeah, we actually had a question come in from somebody watching live. The question is, what do you think of Sentinel Lighthouse for multi-tenant monitoring?
So I haven't had experience with it firsthand, but what it does, it makes managed service providers' lives much easier, because it can give them, from my understanding, if you're an MSSP and you have say like 10 different customers and they're leveraging Sentinel, then you could have a centralized view for those customers' environments, and so it makes management for MSSPs much easier
without having to log in and out of 10 different tenants, like having a different set of dashboards for each one, right?
Exactly, which in itself poses a bit of a security risk. So
yeah, no, totally makes sense. To kind of build on Katie's question, is this something? Is Sentinel something that could replace a traditional, on-prem or cloud-based SIEM, or is it more focused on ingesting cloud technologies, logs and events from cloud-based technologies? Or I mean, you mentioned Palo Alto Firewall, so I'm assuming that this could replace like a Splunk or a Logarithm or an ArcSight.
right, and that's a very good assessment. So Sentinel, from my experience doing consulting at Accenture and everything else, it can replace traditional SIEMs, and it does a very good job at doing so. We actually do some SIEM migration work within Accenture, and we have a good amount of customers that have transitioned from the traditional SIEMs to Sentinel, just because it makes more sense from a cost perspective, but also an efficiency perspective. And so it does have all the bells and whistles, and it can support all of the needs that traditional SIEM currently satisfies for organizations. The answer would be yes.
Okay. Yeah. And like how, I guess, how would it compare against, I'm not even sure if AWS has an equivalent to a SIEM. I've not seen anything. Like, obviously there's, CloudTrail, like they have, different systems for getting the logs to you, but I've not seen anything for managing them. Like, the closest thing that comes to mind for me is Sumo Logic for something similar to this, or Devo maybe.
Right, and Devo and Sumo Logic would be third parties that you can activate within the AWS console. And I'm not AWS SME per se, but I do not think I have not come across an AWS CloudNative SIEM. I know that Google has Chronicle, which is something similar. It allows you to query logs and things of that nature. But AWS, I'm not sure that they've gotten to that point yet. I do think it would be a smart idea if they did.
Yeah. All right. Before we wrap up the conversation, I think you had, obviously we've got the upcoming webcast mentioned in the show notes, but are there any other resources you would recommend people check out when they're playing around with Sentinel, jumping into it, trying to learn a bit more about it?
Absolutely, and I'll send some of these resources over via. I'll send them in the chat after we wrap up here, so you can put them in the show notes. But the number one go-to Sentinel training solution would be Microsoft Sentinel Ninja Training, which has, I think, like 15 different chapters, and it's extremely extensive. It's something that Microsoft reviews on maybe like a monthly basis to update it with and align it with everything that the Sentinel team has been up to. So, for example, there's some UEBA, user entity behavior, analytics features that the Sentinel team is currently working on, and that's added into the Ninja training there. And then obviously, like, Microsoft also has Ninja training for other services and products. So like I think they have one for Azure Security Center, but the one-stop shop for Sentinel training would be that Ninja training, which will be in the show notes.
All right, awesome, good stuff. Larry, Katie, anything else before we wrap?
Not for me.
Nothing from me, Adrian. I did, as you were asking about some, SIEM stuff for AWS. I was sort of noting that there's a bunch of third-party solutions, but it doesn't appear that, as you were saying, AWS has anything specific. So
yeah. Okay.
For me.
Very cool. Well, Darwin, thanks so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today. I'm looking forward to that the KQL Kung Fu webcast that's coming up.
Yeah, it'll be very fun. So hopefully by then you'd have time to stick your head into Sentinel and you can join us, Adrian. Yeah. But for anyone listening, right, and everyone listening, definitely sign up and register. It'll be a fun session, and I'm super pumped to deliver the workshop. So, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely, anytime. We'll be right back in a few moments with the weekly Enterprise News.